fire trucks arrived, the houses were already gone. But that wasn't what stopped them cold. What stopped them was the human remains they found underneath. The cause of the fire was thought to be a regular electrical fire. This was a construction site still in progress, unfinished walls, loose wiring, nothing unusual. But when the flames died and the ground cooled, one of the firefighters noticed something in the ash, something that didn't burn. He brushed the dirt aside and realized it wasn't debris. It was bone. At first, they thought it was one victim, maybe a squatter who didn't make it out. But within the hour, they found 4 more, all buried beneath the foundation. Someone had buried them there years ago and hoped that no one would ever dig that deep. I'm Detective Cassandra Maddox, and this is the case of the missing victims of Grace Hollow. I was called in after the second fire. The first one could have been dismissed. Faulty wiring, old materials, kids breaking in. But 2 in the same neighborhood, 11 days apart, both in properties scheduled for demolition. That wasn't coincidence. Grace Hollow was a ghost town. 12 years ago, a chemical spill forced every resident to evacuate. The air was toxic, the soil declared unsafe, and the development was left to rot. So, nature took over. Vines crawling through kitchen tiles, walls buckling under the weight of silence. Now, the county had approved a plan to rebuild the homes using the same plots and same layout. A new contractor was set to break ground in a month. That's what made the fires interesting. When the first one burned, it exposed remains beneath the concrete foundation. Old bones, sealed under layers of poured cement. Not victims of the fire, but of something much older. The second fire revealed the same pattern. Different address, same kind of burial. Whoever did this knew exactly where to find them, and more importantly, when to strike, which just happens to be right before the excavators would have uncovered what was left behind. I went through the original construction records from 2010, back when the first Grace Hollow homes were being built. Only one name appeared on every permit, every inspection report, every work order: Henry Callaway. He'd owned the company that built this place, Callaway and Sons Construction. On paper, it went bankrupt after the spill, but Callaway stayed local. He changed jobs and started a quiet life 2 towns over. He had no criminal record, no missing persons connections, and not even a parking ticket. But every house that burned had one thing in common. Callaway had overseen its construction, every concrete pour, every foundation, every nail. He didn't just build Grace Hollow, he buried it. And when the town decided to resurrect his work, with the new construction soon to start, he made sure it burned before anyone saw what was underneath. All of this started with a single disappearance. A 28-year-old nurse named Laura Kinsey, who was last seen leaving her night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. Her car was found the next morning on County Road 9. 2 months later, it happened again with a mechanic named Daniel Reyes, on the same road, same hour, and same pattern. By the time the 5th person vanished, the county was in full panic. Between 2007 and 2009, 5 people gone. No witnesses, no bodies. Just a 3-mile stretch of asphalt that locals began calling the Hollow Mile. They all had different lives and different stories, but there were constants. Each one disappeared in late autumn, each one leaving work after dark, and every one of them took that same road home. Detectives called it a coincidence, but it wasn't random, and it wasn't new. Because buried in the old city records, there were reports of disappearances going back years, long before Laura Kinsey ever drove that road. They were never connected, never mapped together, until now. The remains pulled from the foundations weren't random. They weren't from one timeline either. The dental analysis confirmed it. One victim was from the early 2000s, another from 2008, another from 2009. Different years, same burial method, same concrete mix, same foundation depth. That alone was enough to reopen every missing person file connected to the Hollow Mile. But what changed everything? was a box the county had forgotten existed, a storage crate from the original Grace Hollow project, sealed, mislabeled, and never logged into evidence after the chemical spill evacuation. It belonged to Henry's company. Inside were 2 sets of blueprints, the city-approved copies, and Henry's private drafts. Side by side, you could see it instantly. 5 foundation slabs had been altered, slightly deeper, slightly wider, with rectangular voids drawn beneath them. Not utility spaces, not maintenance access. Voids. And every void corresponded to a house that burned. But what made my stomach drop wasn't the blueprint. It was the ledger tucked behind it. A worn, water-stained worker rotation sheet from 2007 to 2009. At the bottom were 5 names, written in a different pen, different handwriting, and next to each name, a lot number. Laura Kinsey, Lot 12. Daniel Reyes, Lot 7. Mia Harlow, Lot 3. Evan Price, Lot 18. Sarah Delmont, Lot 9. Every missing person from the Hollow Mile tied to a single property. Properties Henry personally inspected, properties that later caught fire. There was no universe in which those pairings were coincidence. Then we found the thing that locked it in. A purchase order dated November 14th, 2009, the night after the final disappearance. Henry ordered a custom batch of fast-curing, high-compressive concrete, enough to fill 5 oversized foundation slabs. It wasn't used anywhere else in Grace Hollow, just those lots. And at the bottom of the order, in the comments section, Henry wrote 2 words: Void Fill. He didn't even hide it. He buried those people in cavities he built himself, sealed the slabs, and left them there, waiting for the world to forget. But the world didn't forget, because the concrete told us everything Henry tried to burn away. Core samples from Lot 12 came back first. They contained fragments of a gold pendant fused into the lowest layer, a pendant Laura's sister had reported missing with her. Police never found it at the time because it wasn't on the road. It was under a house. Another sample from Lot 7 held a metal bolt from a work belt, engraved with Daniel Reyes's initials. His family said he engraved all his tools, said the police brushed it off as sentimental. Then came the worst one. Lot 3. A partial jawbone embedded in the foundation. With a healed dental chip, Mia Harlow's dentist had documented 1 month before she vanished. These weren't general similarities. These were matches. Physical, irrefutable, impossible coincidences. Someone placed all 5 victims beneath those houses. Someone who had access to the plans. Someone who could alter foundation depth, pour concrete off the books, and work at night without raising suspicion. And only one person fit every criterion. Henry Calloway didn't just build Grace Hollow. He turned it into a burial ground, and the only reason we uncovered it was because he panicked the moment he heard the county would be breaking ground. When they dug beneath the second burned property, the crew found something fused into the older foundation layer. At first, it looked like scrap metal, a rusted square plate, thin as a coin. But the moment they brushed the dirt off, the numbers stamped across the surface came through. HC14, Callaway's supervisor tag. In 2010, every Callaway & Sons construction supervisor wore one on the job. They were required to log foundation inspections by scanning their tag before concrete was poured. It was a way to track who approved what and when. Lose your tag, you replaced it. Simple. But Henry never reported his missing. And HC14 shouldn't have been inside that slab. That tag was embedded directly above the burial layer. Same depth as the bodies. Same concrete batch poured 15 years ago. Which meant only one thing. Whoever buried those victims was standing on top of them when he signed off the foundation. And the tag wasn't an accident. It wasn't dropped. It had been intentionally bent, as if someone forced it down into wet cement and smoothed the surface after. He marked it. He marked the grave. What a cold-blooded psychopath. When I checked the old inventory logs, the confirmation was sickening. Henry was the only one assigned Tag 14. He was the only supervisor on duty the week those foundations were poured. And he was the only employee whose logs showed late-night work hours during the entire build. Every other supervisor scanned in during normal shifts. Henry clocked in after midnight, repeatedly, always on the days before a foundation pour. Those weren't inspections, those were burials, and it explained the fires. He wasn't trying to hide electrical issues. He wasn't covering up mistakes. He was destroying the only sites where his tag, his literal signature, still existed beneath the concrete. He thought the redevelopment crews would dig deep enough to expose his work. He panicked, and he torched every house he knew held a body before demolition started. Finding that tag didn't just tie Henry to the victims, it tied him to the exact night he put them in the ground. Once we had the tag, the next step was understanding the victims. 5 disappearances between 2007 and 2009. That much was known. But the deeper I looked, the more obvious it became that these weren't random abductions. Henry wasn't opportunistic. He was selective and methodical. At first glance, the victims had nothing in common. A nurse, a mechanic, a substitute teacher, a retail manager, a college student. Different ages, different backgrounds, different routines. But buried in their case files was a detail investigators had ignored for years. Every one of them filed a construction complaint 6 months before they vanished. Different addresses, different reasons, but the same company. Callaway and Sons. Laura Kinsey, the nurse, called about drainage issues behind her apartment complex. Daniel Reyes reported a sinkhole forming near County Road 9. The substitute teacher filed a noise complaint about late-night excavation near her street. Another mentioned heavy machinery operating after hours on land that wasn't zoned for development. All small things, all dismissed, all tied to Henry. Individually, they looked routine, the kind of nuisance calls cities get every week, so it seems Henry wasn't killing because they saw him. He was killing because they were threats to his projects. Any complaint could trigger a site inspection, and any inspection could uncover the thing he'd been hiding long before the Grace Hollow foundations were ever poured. But one victim was different. The substitute teacher, Sarah Delmont. Her complaint wasn't about noise. In the handwritten notes attached to her file, the city clerk wrote one line that had never been followed up on. Caller reports seeing a man digging after midnight. Says he looked panicked. That note was dated 4 days before she disappeared. She wasn't just a threat to his schedule. She saw him. And once I understood his pattern, something else became painfully clear. 5 victims wasn't the real count. It was just the count of people who complained. Once I understood the complaints, I needed to understand the disappearances. Not as separate events, but as a system. So I reconstructed every night one by one. It started with Laura Kinsey, October 12th, 2007. She clocked out of St. Mary's at 11:03 p.m., stopped at the Shell station on Route 6 at 11:21, and drove toward County Road 9. Her car was found the next morning, and in the old construction logs, Henry had marked a late inspection that night. No inspector was ever scheduled, but he was there, preparing for Laura's burial. 2 months later, it was Daniel Reyes, December 6th. He closed up the auto shop at 10:47 p.m., sent a text to his sister saying he'd be home in 20 minutes, and vanished on the same stretch of road, 3 miles south of Laura's car. That same week, Callaway and Sons filed a soil report for a parcel of land no one had approved for work. Callaway was preparing another site. The third victim, Sarah Delmont, was the only one who gave us a glimpse of his mistake. The note in her file, the one mentioning a man digging after midnight, wasn't just a detail. It was a location. She lived near the Eastern Ravine. Her jogging route cut directly behind one of Callaway and Sons' unlisted work zones. 4 days after she reported him, she vanished. She wasn't abducted at random. She walked right into his operation. The 4th and 5th victims followed the same rhythm. Late-night last sightings, cars abandoned facing the woods, work logs showing unauthorized equipment moving hours before the disappearances. And the strangest consistency of all, Every abduction happened on a night Henry had marked as foundation prep, even when there were no scheduled foundations. He wasn't preparing construction sites, he was preparing graves. By the time I finished mapping the timelines, a grim pattern emerged. Henry didn't hunt. He waited. He knew exactly when each victim left work. He knew their routes. He knew the blind spots in that 3-mile stretch, the places where headlights vanished, where no cell tower reached, where a vehicle could be blocked without being seen. They drove straight into his plan, and once they were gone, he used the same equipment meant for building homes to erase them. But the worst part wasn't how he abducted them. It was how easily he hid them. All he needed was concrete. If Henry really abducted, killed, and buried 5 people without leaving a trail, then why didn't anyone find anything? Not once. Not a footprint. Not a complaint that stuck. Not a report that ever led anywhere. I kept reading, and something finally broke the pattern. A deputy named Michael Rourke. He handled the missing person files for 3 of the 5 victims. Different years, different deputies assigned. But somehow Rourke always ended up with the paperwork on his desk. And a second problem appeared. Every time one of those victims disappeared, Rourke logged himself nowhere near where he should have been. But he always drove the highway that cut straight past Henry Calloway's job sites, and he always filed the cleanest reports. No contradictions, no follow-up questions, no re-interviews. It wasn't police work, it was maintenance. I didn't notice it at first. That's what bothers me the most. I should have caught it. I should have felt it. But sometimes the truth doesn't arrive like a punch. It creeps in slowly, settling behind your ribs before you realize you're holding your breath. It started when I mentioned the soil. I told Detective Rourke about the composite layers under the burned foundations, how the sand-stratified pattern suggested the burials weren't random, but deliberate and systematic. How whoever did this had to understand exactly how deep the base layers would go, how the load-bearing slabs were poured, how long the soil would stay undisturbed. Rourke didn't react the way anyone should when they hear the words systematic burials. No questions, no pressure, no urgency. He just stared at me. A stillness so complete it felt like the whole room exhaled around him. Then he smiled, a small, polite practice smile, and asked me not to jump to conclusions. It wasn't normal. It wasn't rational. It wasn't human. It was the smile of someone taking inventory of my knowledge. I've seen that smile before, on people who are hiding things. And that's when a detail I'd skimmed days ago snapped suddenly into focus. Henry didn't always work alone. Back in 2009, on his earlier developments, long before Grace Hollow, he had a part-time assistant, a young guy working 2 jobs, construction laborer by day, sheriff's deputy in training by night, Elias Rourke. I checked the roster again. There it was, his signature on 2 of Henry's earliest soil surveys, a joint inspection report, a grading recalibration request, names printed together long before anyone mysteriously vanished on the Hollow Mile, which led me to another realization I should have caught sooner. Rourke is the common denominator in every missing persons case that predates Grace Hollow, and in every official search effort that led nowhere. The misclassified evidence, the search grids that conveniently missed the right sectors, the witness tips that didn't pan out. All of it under his supervision. Henry buried the bodies, but Rourke buried the trail. And suddenly every strange pause, every deflection, every time he told me not to pursue something for my own safety, it wasn't caution. It was a warning, a quiet way of saying, you're getting close to something you're not supposed to see. I felt it in my chest, that shift, that cold drop, when I realized I couldn't go to him anymore. Not with evidence, not with theories, not with questions. Because if I did, I wouldn't just be dismissed, I'd be handled. 2 men built Grace Hollow's secret. One poured the foundations, the other made sure no one ever dug them up. And now both of them know I'm digging. I knew if I kept digging in the open, Rourke would see every move I made before I made it. So I stopped working forward and started working backward. Not from Grace Hollow, not from the Hollow Mile, from something older, something neither Henry nor Rourke ever thought anyone would look at again. Henry's first company didn't start with Grace Hollow. It started with a small subdivision called Maple Crossing, built 3 years before the first disappearance on the Hollow Mile. A project that stalled after budget issues, then shut down entirely after a zoning dispute. The moment I pulled the archival blueprints, something hit me like a brick to the chest. The foundation layouts were identical, not similar, not inspired by, identical. Same measurements, same soil grading, same drainage patterns, same trench lines. Grace Hollow wasn't a new vision. It was a replica, a second attempt. I checked the inspection logs. Only one inspector filed supplemental soil reports during Maple Crossing. Deputy Trainee E. Rourke. And every one of his reports flagged no issues, even when the soil compaction ratios were mathematically impossible. Anyone else would have been caught for fraud in 2 seconds. But this wasn't fraud. This was rehearsal. I needed something concrete, something physical that tied them together before the Hollow Mile victims ever disappeared, and I found it in a lawsuit. A single-page complaint, filed by a resident near Maple Crossing, claiming that the construction site had irregular night activity. Heavy machinery at 2 a.m., digging where no foundations were planned. A truck with the Callaway and Sons logo leaving before sunrise. The name on the complaint jumped out at me so hard my hands shook. Laura Kinsey, the first missing victim, years before she vanished on the Hollow Mile, years before she ever took that road home. She had already crossed paths with Henry Callaway, and she'd already tried to report him. Her complaint never made it to a judge because the deputy assigned to follow up was Elias Rourke. He marked the complaint as resolved. 11 months later, Laura disappeared. I stared at the page so long the words blurred, but there was no denying it anymore. Henry didn't choose random victims. He eliminated anyone who threatened his work, and Rourke made sure the threat stayed buried. Maple Crossing wasn't just a stalled project. It was the blueprint for murder. And Grace Hollow was the masterpiece they built together. But this complaint, this link between Laura and Henry years before the Hollow Mile, that was the crack in the dam. Because if Laura saw something, then she wasn't the only one. Someone else must have known. Someone else must have tried to speak up. And if their reports vanished, they vanished because Rourke removed them. I'd finally found the first thread they never meant to leave. And if I pulled it hard enough, the entire town of Grace Hollow would come apart. I didn't need a confession. I didn't need a witness. I didn't even need a body, though God knows there were enough of those now. All I needed was one thing: a public record they couldn't erase. The Maple Crossing complaint filed by Laura Kinsey was enough to open a review, but the real blow came from something even simpler: one mismatched timestamp. While reviewing old zoning files, I noticed something strange: a soil compaction report logged by Rourke at 6:14 p.m., on a day he swore he was miles away at a community safety meeting. The meeting had been recorded. He was on camera, in uniform, handing out pamphlets, yet his signature sat on a construction report at the exact same time. One of them had to be false. I submitted the discrepancy to Internal Affairs, not as a smoking gun, but as a procedural anomaly needing clarification. They took it from there. That single timestamp forced them to audit everything Rourke had touched, and once they opened one box, they found every box he'd tried to hide. Rewritten reports, misfiled tips, missing evidence logs, search maps with whole sectors mysteriously excluded. And then, the part even I didn't expect: a payment record. Not a big one, just a line item buried under equipment rental reconciliations from 12 years ago. A payment from Callaway and Sons Construction to the sheriff's office for security coordination. No one could explain why. No one even knew it existed. But 2 signatures appeared at the bottom: Henry Callaway, Deputy Elias Rourke. When IA pulled Rourke in for questioning, he folded faster than I thought possible. Not in guilt, in fear. He asked for a lawyer immediately. Rourke wasn't Henry's partner by loyalty. He was Henry's partner because Henry wouldn't let him be anything else. When the news reached Henry that the sheriff's office was reopening every missing person case from the Hollow Mile, that Rourke was being held for questioning, that the reconstruction crew had been ordered to halt all demolition, he panicked. He tried to run. Not far, not clever. Straight to the one place he still believed he controlled, the unfinished development at Grace Hollow. By the time law enforcement arrived, he was standing near the foundation of one of the burned plots, pacing in frantic circles, kicking through rubble like he could physically dig the past back underground. He didn't even hear them coming. He just froze, staring at the exposed soil layers, muttering to himself, refusing to step away. Henry walked into custody like a man who'd finally seen the bottom of the trench he'd dug for everyone else. And Rourke? He cracked completely when he learned Henry had been arrested alive. For years, he believed Henry kept him safe. With Henry talking, and he did talk, because cowards always do when they think the other coward talks first, the entire structure fell apart. Grace Hollow, once a ghost town, became an active crime scene. And when the dust settled, two men stood at the center of a 12-year storm. Henry Calloway, who built the graves. Elias Rourke, who kept them hidden. Grace Hollow didn't burn because of faulty wiring. It burned because their secret finally ran out of places to hide. And now? Now the ground is speaking for the first time in 12 years. And it's telling the truth. Case closed, and yet again. Checkmate. If you're still here, you're one of the curious ones. Stick around. The next mystery's already waiting.